What can you do when your community is hurting, when its health is in jeopardy, its finances are faltering, and its schools are at a standstill? What can you do? That's what the leaders, organizers, and hand-raisers who make up Women United ask themselves every single day.
Women United, it's a force, a global force of over 70,000 women that come together to move the needle for the issues that are important to them in their community.
We set out a goal in 2006 to reduce teen pregnancy in the city of Milwaukee by 46%, and we actually hit that number 2 years before 2015.
The other aspect of it is that it has really galvanized a lot of women leaders in this community around a really important issue that has a direct impact on future women leaders in Milwaukee.
Because in every city, in every town, every sleepy suburb, there are problems, and they won't get solved unless some powerful force leads the charge to take them on. Women United is proud to accept that challenge. We're a diverse, vibrant group of leaders, more than 70,000 strong, and we're a force to be reckoned with. As part of United Way, we have unparalleled resources to make lasting local changes with global impact.
In the San Francisco Bay Area, our Women United is focused on alleviating poverty. We have a goal to cut poverty in half. It's a big, audacious goal, and I wanted to join together with other like-minded and powerful women to accomplish that goal.
Women leaders are willing to collaborate and get to state houses and work on policy. That's how social change happens.
We live united against the most critical issues in over 165 communities in 6 countries. We empower each other to use our passions, our ideas, our expertise, and resources to transform the very conditions in which people live.
We do more than volunteer. We also have the opportunity to strategize and also to advocate. I think advocacy is one of the strongest platforms to inspire change.
We celebrate together, we network together. At the end of the day, we collaborate together. We have a camaraderie that's different.
Their sleeves are rolled up, they are ready to go to work, and they are ready to fight to make our communities a better place.
Our communities need champions who understand their problems and see their potential. They need advocates who can offer real solutions. They need someone who can get things done. So we invite you to accept the challenge and join us. Because a stronger community is only possible when women live united.
Hello, and welcome everyone. I hope that you're doing well today. I'm really happy to see that so many of you are here with us live. My name is Michelle Branch, and I'm the current chair of the Women United Global Leadership Council. I also serve on the board of the United Way Bay Area, where I was a founding Women United member for our local chapter, and where I'm currently the Public Policy and Advocacy Chair. I want to say hello to my friends in California and around the country. It's great to see so many of you here again, and I've really appreciated the opportunity to collaborate with so many of you over the years, and I really hope that we can do more of that together in the future. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm really looking forward to, again, being able to see everyone in person soon, once we can all be healthy and safe together. So we are, and I am, extremely grateful that you have joined us today for this important discussion about the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Soon you will hear from our speakers, Suzanne McCormick, U.S. President of United Way, Dr. Brenda Stevenson, Professor of History at UCLA, and Morgan Johnson, joining us from the United States of Women. I will introduce each of them a little bit later. The 19th Amendment acknowledged and expanded women's right to vote in the United States. But as we all know, the story is much more complicated, and the struggle to vote continued long after the 19th Amendment was ratified, and the struggle still continues today. That's why today we're looking forward to engaging you in a rich conversation about women's suffrage, and one that is much more inclusive than what we hear in the traditional narrative, because not all women achieve the right to vote with the passage of the 19th Amendment, and that is especially true for women of color. This anniversary coincides with tragedy in the United States today. COVID-19 is just one example of an ongoing event of catastrophic proportion that is presently impacting Black and Brown people and communities disproportionately. For me, it's impossible to disconnect disparate impact from a fundamental constitutional right, the right to vote, and to seek meaningful change in American communities today. So, with that context and framing, today we're going to focus specifically on African American women and learning more about how we, in particular, have played a central role in women's suffrage from the founding of the country until today. And we'll also talk about how, in the present day, women are making our voices heard and how we can be politically engaged in our communities in a way that really and truly matters. That is the issue that's directly before us today. When we began, you watched a powerful clip about our Women United chapters across the country and the work that we are doing to lead the charge and inspire change around the world. We are fortunate that many of our Women United leaders have joined our conversation today, as well as so many of you who are also committed to the cause and the fight for gender equity. We invite you to share your stories in the chat. As you may have seen earlier in the broadcast, we featured stories from women about the challenges and barriers that we are facing today. So please share your stories in the chat box. We also know that it's an incredibly difficult time for so many of you who have lost loved ones due to COVID and who are suffering, and our hearts do go out to you. My wish is that today we will all be able to share in a session of learning, hope, and plans for positive action and change that is meaningful. With that, I am delighted to welcome our first guest today, Suzanne McCormick. Suzanne is the U.S. President of United Way Worldwide. Suzanne, we're so glad to have you with us today.
Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be here with you, especially as always, and with everyone who's joining us.
Thank you, Suzanne. So, Suzanne, to start off the conversation today, could you please tell us why United Way Worldwide decided to host this particular conversation and today?
Well, as you've said, the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote is, and it's an incredible milestone, but it's also a reflection point for the women's movement and what women are facing today. There's two important points that we want to highlight in our conversation today. One is a point that you've already alluded to, and that is that women's suffrage was not an inclusive movement, and it left out many Black women. With the original right to vote. It took many years after the vote passed for them to actually have the right to vote. Women like Ida Wells, who started the NAACP, women like Nanny Helen Burroughs, who was a great suffragist, and also Mary Terrell, just to name a few. This last weekend, I participated in a workshop led by Robin DiAngelo, the author of White Fragility. And before she really started to talk about race equity, she highlighted this fact that we said women got the right to vote, but if you look at a picture on Facebook or Google on the anniversary, they'll show 9 women. And if you really, wanted to be real, only 2 of those women got the right to vote, and they were the white women. And so we think this is a really important part of the conversation. The second point that we want to talk about is women's power and influence today. The COVID epidemic has really put a spotlight on the fact that there is still gender inequality. We've seen women struggle to try to manage their jobs, balance workloads at home in a way that is not equal to men. We've also seen more women lose their jobs as a result of the pandemic, and they are bearing the brunt of having to hold their families together. It's unacceptable, and it's a conversation that we as women need to continue to lead.
So, Suzanne, you mentioned the many challenges that women are facing during COVID-19. Can you share more with us about what United Way has done and is doing in response to the coronavirus?
United Ways across the country have stood up and stepped into leadership to help problem solve with their communities, to pull together different resources. A really important part of that in many places was the 211 network that United Way leads. That's the 3-digit number that people can call for information and resources. Early in the pandemic, 211 was activated by up to 33 governor's offices as the go-to place for information. As we moved through the pandemic, 211 started to receive calls, not just for information, but for people seeking help, for women seeking help, looking for financial assistance, for food assistance. And this has continued to rise as the unemployment rate has increased, as families, have found themselves not in a 2-month struggle, but a 6-month struggle. And women, again, are at the forefront of that. But luckily, United Way has really demonstrated its leadership. And I think the power of United Way is that we will continue to be there for the long haul, not just in the immediate response, but as we start to move into a recovery phase when that happens. And certainly we want to lead in a reimagining phase and a rebuilding phase so that we don't go back to some of the ways life was before COVID, and that we really try to focus on the inequities that have been so tragically exposed.
Well, Suzanne, thank you for sharing about the work that you're doing to respond to the immediate needs of women and communities of color who are affected by this health and economic crisis. I know that we have just a short amount of time with you here today, so we're really appreciative that you've joined us. What advice do you have for other leaders today, in particular leaders who are women?
Well, I had an opportunity to do an interview with Forbes Women a couple months ago, and I'll share the sentiment that I shared there. Is I think women are we were made for these challenges. We have always been the ones who have had to work harder to balance family and work and life and social obligations and volunteerism. And I think we have a resilience and a power that we have to continue to carry forward. I've heard so many stories, and people ask me, "How are you doing?" And I've said, for me personally, my struggles are small in comparison to some of my friends. You know, I have friends who lost their parents, I have friends who lost their jobs, but through this all, I mean, the spirit and the power of women continues just to be so inspirational. And one of my favorite quotes, which I won't get exactly right, but it was from Margaret Thatcher, and it's this: if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. And I think this is our time to continue to really advocate for our place in the power structures of our democracy.
Thank you, Suzanne. Those are great words of wisdom and guidance. We really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you again for your tremendous leadership and your commitment to this work, especially during this challenging time.
Thanks, Michelle.
So we have a few minutes in our program to share some of the feedback that we are seeing from our members and the people who have joined us today in the chat. And I see here that Dr. Juliet Tuakli says, thank you for having this important forum at this time. Dr. Tuakli is actually the chair of the board of United Way Worldwide, which is really exciting. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate that. We're also seeing someone who's writing from Lycoming County United Way, who says that they are proud to be a member of a network, and this network in particular of really strong women leaders. Oh, Kim Washington says here, 211 has been an awesome help. It saves so much frustration and is an excellent source of collaboration. Thank you, Kim. Yes, what we've seen during this time is that the 211 network has, at least I can talk about what's happened in our local United Way Bay Area. It's, more than doubled the use of 211, with people really using it to provide urgent information, receive services, understand how to get connected to the resources that they need. It's been really critical. And maybe one more comment here. From Dolores Taylor, Dolores says, Dolores is working with 300 families who are homeless, and the struggle is real. The tears and the sweat and the voices and the crying that echoes through the phone calls and the Zoom meetings. It's really difficult, challenging work. Dolores, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing on behalf of United Way and for your local communities. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Makes such a difference. Please continue to share your stories with us. And when we have time, we will share the stories back that you're sharing here through chat. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Brenda Stevenson. As we think about the women who fought and campaigned for suffrage 100 years ago, it's important to acknowledge all of the women who were involved in the movement. Many women fought for suffrage but did not gain any right to vote, even after the 19th Amendment had been passed. They continued to fight. This is true of Indigenous women, Latinx women, women of Asian American descent, and also African American descent. To help us understand some aspects of this complicated history as it relates to African American women in particular, we have invited Dr. Brenda Stevenson from UCLA to join us. Dr. Stevenson is a historian, author, and professor at UCLA. And so you know a little bit more about her, I'm going to just extend my bio of Dr. Stevenson. Such an illustrious person. She's an internationally recognized scholar of race, slavery, gender, family, and racial conflict. And her specific intellectual interests center on the comparative historical experience of women, families, and communities across racial and ethnic lines. Race and gender, the ways in which these two variables intersect, interact, and collide with, emphasize, run parallel to, and sometimes isolate one another, are at the center of her work. And those are her words. Professor Stevenson's research has won numerous prizes, including the James Raleigh Prize from the Organization of American Historians for the best book in race relations in the United States. And that book was The Contested Murder of Latasha Harlins. She has won the Ida B. Wells Barnett Award for Bravery in Journalism. And she's also the recipient of the Gustavus Meyer Outstanding Book Prize for Life in Black and White. Her research has been supported by the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Mellon Foundation, and many, many others. So I'm letting you all know today that you're in for a real treat when you're listening to Dr. Stevenson. So welcome, Dr. Stevenson. Thank you for making the time to be here with us. As you can tell, we're thrilled to welcome you and to learn from you.
I'm very happy to be here. It's quite an honor. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Dr. Stevenson, your life's work has focused on telling the stories of African American women. What can you share with us about the involvement of Black women in the women's suffrage movement? And I'm going to complicate this question somewhat, if you don't mind. What is and was the women's suffrage movement for Black women? Did it even have a defining time period for Black women, since the struggle does continue today? So curious about the women's suffrage movement, and then how that relates to African American women.
Well, the women's struggle movement, like social justice movements of the 19th and the 20th and now the 21st century, are essential and central to Black women's lives. Black women realized this and became very involved, and even were pioneers, of course, in the ways in which Black women were presented as political activists and actors in the country. And if we start as early as, the 1830s, we look at Maria Stewart, for example, giving the first political speeches to mixed audiences of men and women in Boston between 1831 and 1833. And then we look at the long line of other Black women who were involved in abolition, who were involved in temperance, who were involved in the public school campaigns for public schools for children in the Midwest, the West, and the Northeast. And of course, again, in the abolitionist movement, so very important. And so Black women have always been involved in social justice and gaining political rights and equality. And certainly that included the vote.
Are there some stories in particular that you want to share with us that really come to mind?
Well, I really want to talk about one person in particular. We all know about Sojourner Truth, for example. We all know a great deal about her, but we don't know a lot about Maria Stewart. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about her. She was born as a servant in Hartford, Connecticut at the very beginning of the 19th century. She really worked her way up into being a servant, self-educated herself, moved to Boston, married, became very involved in evangelical religion, and saw her role as an evangelical speaker as one to put forth the equality of Black people and Black women in particular. And as I said, she was the first woman to have a series of political lectures before a public audience of men and women. And this is not the first African-American woman. This is the first woman in the United States to do so. And for that, of course, she was branded promiscuous and, doing something completely inappropriate. But she made it very clear in the 4 lectures that she did give, as well as in the things, the articles and essays that she was able to publish, that Black women had to be at the table, that Black women had a lot to offer, that we suffered a great deal, no matter what we had to offer, and that we had an absolute right to be in the leadership in terms of crafting the political landscape, not only of the African American community, but of the larger, quote unquote, American community. She persevered, as women do. And she, even though she kind of was run out of Boston, she went to New York. She continued to educate herself. She became involved in the public school initiative for Black children in New York City. And during the time of the American Civil War, she came to Washington, D.C., and she'd already been in Baltimore. She was opening schools for Black children. She became the matron of the Freedmen's Hospital. She continued to push for the rights of Black women and Black people in general. And she's just one of the many, many, many women of color, and a Black woman particularly, who just was a force of nature, just refused the no's, refused the closed doors, refused the actual violence that they had to face to move forward. Of course, other people come to mind as well. When we look at Mary Church Terrell, for example, when we look at Shad Carey, who's sort of the first Black newspaper by a Black woman. All of these people, Frances Harper, Charlotte Fortin. There were just so many, many other people that we can call upon. If we get to the end of the 19th century, into the 20th century, then we really are looking at people like Ida B. Wells, who of course is leading the anti-lynching campaign, along with trying to get women to vote. We are continuing to look at Sojourner Truth. We're continuing to look at, we're looking at Nanny Barrows. We're looking at all of these women who are becoming involved in new civil rights initiatives, the labor movement, also involved in getting education for Black children and for Black people, and of course fighting the new Jim Crow. And at that time, the new Jim Crow was Jim Crow. And standing up, participating in the conventions that led to the 15th Amendment, and then participating in the national organizations of suffragists as well, where they were allowed to do so, and creating their own local organizations and national networks in their churches, in their literary societies, in their clubs. In the club movement, for example, many of those women were very, very focused on getting the vote for not just Black women, but for other women and for other men as well, who were, of course, being kept away from voting through violence, through legislation, etc.
So this is a long legacy to build on, a long legacy.
It is.
I'm curious.
Yes.
So so I want to take you back, if you don't mind, back into the 19th century. And I'm curious, you've written a book about Charlotte Grimke, is that right? And so I'm curious if you could talk with us. And I'm curious if you could talk with us a little bit about Charlotte Grimke and her role, her life and her contributions, and also thinking about kind of the foundation that she helped to build for others to stand on.
Well, Charlotte Fortin is, again, a force of nature. She was born actually in an elite free Black family in Philadelphia. And she went on to take on the legacy of her family, which were social justice activists. I mean, this is what they lived, they dedicated their lives to, and spent a lot of their fortune on. Her family actually helped to create the Liberator magazine, which was William Lloyd Garrison's abolitionist magazine, the most important abolitionist magazine or newspaper of the 19th century. And it was her grandfather and her uncles who actually gave a lot of the money up front to Garrison and kept the newspaper going until it could self-sustain itself. So she grew out of this legacy. Her mother, her aunts all helped were founding members of the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. She was extremely well educated, as was everyone in her family. Her father actually sent her off to Salem Massachusetts, so that she could go to integrated and more intellectually stimulating schools than she could have found in the segregated schools of Philadelphia at the time. She became a writer, a poet, a speaker as well, although she was particularly shy, so it was difficult for her to speak in public. But she got into this network of Black female activists from her family, a network that went from Philadelphia to New York to Boston to Salem, up and down the East Coast, and towards the Midwest. And she dedicated her life to that. So she was one of the first teachers to go to the American South at the time of the Civil War to begin to educate Black people who were coming out of slavery. She was sent by the Port Royal Commission to South Carolina, on the coast of South Carolina, to St. Helena Island. She began to educate young Black children, also other women and men, and elderly people too, in the rudimentary aspects of formal education. She went on after that. She married Francis Grimke, who had been educated at Princeton, who was a minister. They began a missionary, as missions. They traveled throughout the South. He had an important church in Washington, D.C., which she, of course, was a part of. And throughout her life, she wrote, she advocated, she sacrificed for Black liberation and for the role of women in the practice of Black liberation. And again, she's one of the key people in a community of key Black female activists of the 19th and into the 20th century.
So what I'm learning from you is that the right to vote is essential to the freedom struggle as well. And there's a strong intersectional relationship between the right to vote and liberation and freedom, and the right to vote for women as well, not just men.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's what our country is all about. I mean, it's about, democratic representation of people's, in the governance structure. And so how do you get access to that representation? You have to be able to vote. And of course, African Americans were very much involved in the fight for, the formation of the country and the American Revolution, and they pinned their involvement in the American Revolution on gaining freedom, and gaining rights for themselves, and continued to participate in the Civil War as a result of it, the War of Spanish-American War at the end of the 19th century, of course, World War I, etc. And women supported the war initiatives just as, along with men. Of course, they were not allowed to fight, but they participated by providing supplies, by, being camp followers and giving services in that role. And then, of course, working in factories when we get into the 20th century as well. So, and encouraging males within their families to participate too. So women knew from the very beginning that being able to vote meant being able to have a voice in one's life and in the lives of in the futures of their families, the futures of their communities. And Black people, male and female, really invested psychologically and philosophically and spiritually in the notion of freedom, equality, and how one can access that through the vote.
I like what you said earlier about the voice and the vote as a voice to be able to make change and make a difference in society. That's a good segue for me to ask you another question about just the people we're talking to today, as women advocates. Why is it important for us to know these pieces of history if we want to try to advance gender equity today?
Well, I think we have to know the history to, first of all, make certain that people know that there has not been gender equity, and that this is something that people have desired and have indicated from the very beginning of our history as a nation that is necessary. that is not only necessary, but a right of every citizen within the country to be equal, regardless of one's gender or class or race or culture, etc. And so, being able to draw on the rich history of the United States and of groups who have not found equality, and how we have pushed for that equality, how we have contributed to the evolution of the nation as a political body, to be one that embraces the ideals of our founding. I think it's very, very important, and it's very powerful. I teach my students that they have to take the knowledge that they gain in the classroom about these freedom struggles out into the world, into their private conversations, into their protests, to the work that they do, because it strengthens us to know that we have this long legacy of people who have worked for these initiatives, and to see their commitment and to see their sacrifices and to also see their successes, even as we recognize the incompletion of that work.
Legacy of work, yes, and also of ideas. There's so much intellectual knowledge, right, and ideas that can be shared and that we can rely on going forward. So let me ask you one more question, and that is, what would you say are the challenges and barriers that women of color are still facing today in the United States? And what is it that we can do as women advocates to fight for? What do you think we should be fighting for?
Well, we should be fighting for, obviously, equality. We're not equal. And I think that we can see that if we look at, economic statistics, if we look at political, statistics about representation in politics, if we look at the way in which voter suppression has impacted communities of color and women, of course, we are half of those communities of color. If we look at the ways in which women of color have been marginalized by, by medicine, by the healthcare system. If we look at the ways in which Black women are much more likely to die at the time of giving birth, and their children are much more likely not to survive, birthing. And so those are the kinds of things, if we look at our representation in HIV communities, if we look at our representation in impoverished communities and being the heads of impoverished families, if we look at the pushback actually of women of color who have actually been successful, and the kinds of hostility that success is met with, in the media, in organizations, in corporations, etc. If we look at the disproportionate representation of women of color, particularly Black and brown women, in our prisons, in terms of our violent interaction with policing agencies, all of these things have impact on Black female lives, on brown female lives, on the lives of impoverished women, of women who have psychological issues, who have healthcare issues, etc. So we need to realize that not only are there inequalities with regard to race, but there are also inequalities that intersect with race and gender and class and locale and generation, etc. Educate ourselves as much as possible about the status of women within our society. And this is a global, not just a national, mandate. We have to see how women are faring globally. We are all connected to one another, and our roles as women in society, as half of the population, is all connected. And unfortunately, across the globe, women are treated disproportionately as unequal people and marginalized people in the 21st century. And so we have to know that. We have to tell other people that, and we have to actively address those issues in our social justice work.
Okay, so we need to educate and address the issues.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stevenson. You've shared so much knowledge with us, and we really appreciate just being able to hear a little bit of what you know and what your research has been. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. I've certainly learned a lot today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's again quite an honor, and thank you all for listening.
Absolutely. Have a great day. So we've talked a little bit about the past, and so now as we look to the future, there are current ongoing movements for gender equity. Before we get to that, I did want to see if there are additional comments in chat that we could share with the group. Latassa Johnson says, "Oh, thank you for everything you've done, Dr. Stevenson. I'm truly grateful for you." And Dr. Juliet Tuakli again says, "Thank you for raising the profile of yet another unsung heroine and others besides." Yes, we did learn about a number of different women today from the past who've been especially helpful in the women's movement. So Carolyn Waldman says here, "So powerful to hear the story of these incredible women with ties to the Boston area." I'm wondering if Caroline is maybe from Boston. "I wish I could have learned these stories and names in my history classes growing up in Massachusetts." And another from Sarah Stores here. "Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. Such great inspiration on a cloudy Thursday afternoon, feeling so inspired." I'm glad people are feeling inspired, having heard some of this history. That's one of the goals of today, is to have some inspiration and ideas for action going forward as well. So as we look to the future, there are ongoing movements for gender equity. And there is an important organization that you all should know about that is leading the fight for change. And it's called the United States of Women. I love this name, United States of Women. So Morgan Johnson is here with us today from the United States of Women. She is a Programs and Special Projects Associate there. And with a master's degree in public policy, she is passionate about the intersection of women's advocacy, social policy, and effective transformative leadership. Morgan, we're really looking forward to hearing from you today. Morgan, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm just learning more about your good work at the United States of Women, and I understand that you work to connect, convene, and amplify the voices of women in the fight for full gender equity. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
And can you share more with us about your mission, what that means, and how you accomplish all that?
Definitely. So as a community for all women, gender nonconforming individuals, and allies, the United States of Women collectively works together for full gender equity through our biennial summit, our regional Galvanize events, our ambassador program, which is our grassroots volunteer program. We have 90 ambassadors across 40 states and territories. And now with digital organizing, we host many online events and webinars to achieve our mission. And so through these events and our USOW ambassadors, we build and strengthen coalitions, we cultivate connections, and amplify ongoing gender equity initiatives nationwide. With the pandemic, USOW has also shifted to a fully online platform to continue the fight for gender equity. Our State of Women TV series, which is our Instagram Live series, gives our supporters and network a chance to learn from experts on gender equity issues and how they can take action during this time. We also hosted an online youth summit this summer of the United States of Young Women to connect and uplift the incredible work young women ages 14 through 24 are doing in their communities to make change. And just last month, since we're all talking about voting and the women's movement of suffrage, with our partner, When We All Vote, which is also a friend to United Way, we hosted an event packed When All Women Vote Week of Action. And we highlighted women of color activists who are working on the ground right now to protect the right to vote. We connected with women mayors across the country to ensure that their communities and cities are ready to vote this November. And with our convening power, we were able to reach over 300,000 eligible voters through online engagement and text banking, and to make sure that all of those women have a plan to vote this November.
Wow, that's really incredible. That's really incredible. So since United States of Women has a pulse on the challenges that women are facing today, what are you hearing from women today about what our needs are?
Yeah, so one of the most important things that we've learned here at the USOW is that countless women and girls across the country are ready to see change. Whether that's in access to education, pay equity, health and reproductive justice, or climate, women want to see change in all issue areas that reflect their values, and they want to see change right now. And so we know that this year, a lot of women are concerned about their access to the ballot. As you all know, and we've talked about throughout this entire event, that last month we recognized the centennial of the 19th Amendment's ratification. It was 100 years ago that women got the right to vote, but it was only 55 years ago that all women, particularly Black women, got that same right. And there have been decades and decades of attempts to suppress the vote of women and their families. So to this day, women of color have been fighting to protect their own and their communities' right to vote and their right to choose leaders that represent their values. But we still have so much work to do. And so during this pandemic, we've heard countless stories about communities who are struggling to vote in their primary elections, and even as we get closer to November, the general election. And so we've seen how the USPS has been used as a weapon of voter suppression by limiting access to mail-in our ballots. And women organizers, including our ambassadors and so many of our networks in the USOW, have been on the front lines fighting against voter suppression because we want our voices heard and we want to see that change.
So I'm just trying to process that because that's a lot of information about, we're talking about gaining the right to vote for women, right? And then also now we're talking about voter suppression on the 100th anniversary of, the extension of the right to vote for many women. So just trying to process kind of, what that means. What would you say is the one thing that advocates can do to advance the cause of gender equity? Is it voting or is it something else?
Yeah. So we think here at the United States of Women, this year in particular, it is so important for all of us to be registered to vote and to make sure that our families and friends are registered to vote too. So we can use our voices and our vote to build the communities that we want to live in and that we want to see. And registering to vote and casting your ballot is an essential way to advance gender equity within your own community, your state, and at the national level. So all those issues that we all care about around gender equity, access to education, pay equity, reproductive justice, climate, all of those things are affected by our vote. So we want to make sure that we're all registered to vote and that our communities are registered to vote so we can exercise our rights this coming November. Because when all of us come together to fight for the issues that impact us and our communities, we can create a ripple effect of change in policy, in our local communities, and everywhere in between.
Can you say that last part once again? That's really powerful.
Yes. So when all of us come together to fight for the issues that impact us and our community, we can create a ripple effect of change in policy in our local communities and everywhere in between.
Thank you, Morgan. I'm finding listening to you so inspiring in terms of thinking about what the future is, for sure. So we have a lot to learn from you as well. Are there any other words of wisdom that you wanted to leave us with today?
Yes. As I mentioned before, United Way is a friend of When We All Vote, and United States Women is also a friend to When We All Vote. We have a great partnership with them. I know that a lot of information is being thrown at us about how we can vote, where to vote, what's a mail-in ballot, and you can check out United Way's resources that they'll be sharing shortly, but also When We All Vote resources about how you can request your mail-in ballot, where to drop it off, how you can become a poll worker, all of those great things to make sure that we're exercising our right to vote and creating these communities that we want to see by participating in the election November 3rd.
Great. Morgan, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your strength and your leadership and all that you are doing and all that you're about to do. So thank you so much. So I think we have a few more comments from the audience today. Oh, so Penny Clayton says this is great content and really powerful. I'm glad that you are experiencing this as very positive, Penny. And Pratik Sangupta says, congratulations from India. Oh, this is exciting to see someone writing us from India. Glad to listen to the most pressing issue in India about gender equity. So what Pratik is saying here is that gender equity is the most pressing issue in India right now. And sending us love. Oh, that's so wonderful. Sending us love from United Way's chapter in New Delhi. That's really wonderful. I hope that we'll get a chance to see you and meet you in person one day. And Maya Winfrey says, thank you to Morgan. Completely agree that voting is so important right now. Yes, absolutely. Voting, that's what I'm going to talk about when we wrap up, is voting and how important it is. I don't know if there are any other comments. If not, I'm going to go ahead and let you know that with less than 50 days until a truly historic election, we encourage you to raise your voices and to engage in the political process. And you need to have a plan to vote. On United Way's website, we've created an online voting information center to make it easy for you to register to vote. So to make it easy for you to register to vote, to request your absentee ballot, and to find your polling place. Take action and join us. And remember, again, I don't think we can say it enough times, you need to have a plan to vote. United Way is proud to partner with BET, Black Entertainment Television, and the National Urban League on National Black Vote Day, which is focused on increasing African American civic participation. Join us by sharing your commitment to build the political power of Black communities with the hashtag Reclaim Your Vote. Again, that's hashtag Reclaim Your Vote. And if you're not already involved, we invite you to join our global network of Women United chapters. We give, we advocate, we volunteer with United Way to build stronger communities. We're 75,000 women strong, over 175 chapters throughout the country. So please join us and join the movement that is the Women United. With that, we're going to end the broadcast a little bit early to encourage you to take the remaining time to create your voting plan, because remember, make a plan to vote, and to find ways to support your local community. We're here to support you if you have questions or if you need any further information. I want to thank you again. I do hope that you found today inspiring. I hope that you got some really good ideas in terms of history to build on, and also ideas that you can use for the future, and to make plans to take action and to create meaningful change. So I want to again thank you for joining us today. And I want to say thank you to our amazing speakers, Suzanne McCormick, Dr. Brenda Stevenson, and Morgan Johnson. Really made the program today, and each of you contributed so much. And thank you again for all the wonderful work that you're doing, especially on behalf of us here at United Way. So we sincerely hope that you're feeling fired up and inspired to join the fight with us. And with that, I hope that you will enjoy the rest of your day. Take care and thank you.